Hi, everyone. Thanks for showing up. My name is Gibson, apiary on the internet. Okay, I'm going to try not to eat this. All right. So, hi. I work at CA Veracode. I talk to people about the security findings in their applications. It is what I do. I talk to developers all day long. I've been doing this for 2 years. I've been working in application security at Veracode for 6 years. So of those, 2 have been talking to developers. The rest has been other things. The rest of my life working has also been spent talking to people. So that's what I do. And now I talk to people about their code. So we're going to do that. We're going to go through and we're going to talk about talking to devs about vulns. So this is non-scientific, in case you're wondering. But it feels like there's a 50-50 chance, independent of the actual validity of a finding, the developer is going to tell you it's false positive. Sometimes they'll care really hard about something that is. They'll freak out about fixing it, even though there's no problem. And sometimes they'll tell you that something super real is just not a thing. So it's not always fun, and it's certainly not as much fun as finding them in the first place. The actual problem solving and going in and finding bugs can be great. Talking about them, less so. Okay, so security is somebody else's problem. So this ends up being one of the issues. There's a different department, right? There's a security department. They do all that stuff. They do the WAFs, they do the firewall controls, the access controls, your file system controls. They do that. Why do I have to care about it? Somebody else is doing it already. It's covered. Sorry. Yep, nope, yeah. So it's not usually fun for anybody. Security gets told the findings are false positive, and developers get told that they can't release. They get stuck, they're not able to do what they need to do, and security just gets in the way. And it doesn't make sense. It becomes a really strong adversarial relationship, and no one's having any fun. This is partly because developers are under pressure. You know, there's tight schedules, especially, and security does not conform to them. Like, a bug can come up a couple days before a release. And they need to meet those customer deadlines. They need to be able to send that out and to be able to get that out there. And their management probably doesn't have a full understanding of what it's going to take to fix it. They don't understand it either. And so it's a lot of pressure. It's much easier to just dismiss them entirely. Calm down. So it's a difficult conversation. It's an adversarial relationship. Just super not fun. But we have some tools in our toolbox. They're invisible, but it's okay. We have social engineering. We have, as hacker folks, we have these ways of codifying talking to people so that we can influence them to do certain things, so we can elicit certain information. Why don't we use them? Why don't we fall back on that playbook, back on those tools, to be able to do something for good, to be able to get in there and fix stuff? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have some fun, hopefully. One of the things we're going to do is we're going to rely on my good friend Dale Carnegie and his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I had thought that this was going to be total bullshit and never touched it. Sorry, Mom. But it turns out that all the stuff that I always tell people to do is in this book, so we're going for it. And we're going to use them as jumping off points. You'll see Dale's up next, and we're going to go throughout this talk. We're going to keep relying on these quick wins, these quick tips for being able to talk to people convincingly, be able to bring them onto our side. Because as a friend said, human firmware hasn't changed much in the last 100 years, and so we can still mostly rely on these. So the first one is begin in a friendly way. And I've taken this to mean the begin with something good. So if you have bad news, if you're going to say no to something, you don't just say no. You don't start there. You're going to start with, I understand where you're coming from, or here's something that's good, or here's some options for you, and then, actually, that's an awful idea. Please don't ever do that again. Because if you start with no, if you start with shutting things down, that's all people hear. They hear no, and they shut down. They're not going to listen to your solution. They're not going to listen to why it's an issue or what to do next. So starting with no tends not to be great. It tends to be a way of shutting down a conversation. We're going to try not to do that. All right, so this is my bad news. No one can make you do anything. My mom. She's great. And she's right. People are non-deterministic, right? They're not predictable in all cases. They're going to do things even though you're trying really hard for them not to. There's going to be times where the stuff fails, where somebody, no matter what you say, is not going to listen to you. That's okay. It's not your fault, right? So these are not foolproof methods, but they do work most of the time, and they work often enough to be worth it. All right. Part of this is because I like to think of people as emotional state machines, with a lot of quantum randomness thrown in for fun. But we have emotions, and they modulate and regulate our behavior. And there's some really cool cellular reasons for this, and there's lots of chemicals that do that, and I did not have time to put them in, but I'll be around, and if you want to talk about it, I love behavior modification through hormones and dopamine, but yeah. Anyway, so it doesn't fit in this time slot, but our behaviors tend to be predictable when you know what emotional state people are in, because there tends to be common ways that people behave in those states, which is handy. So it's worth observing other people and trying to figure out what state that is, right? Some social engineers, they will manipulate that state, will try and get you into a particular emotional mindset. This is a way to be able to make you predictable, to be able to influence your behavior. I'm going to call that not a superhero move, so maybe don't do that one. But you can try and foster a positive emotional state. You can try and make sure things stay cool, that you're never going into the negative, that you're not making somebody angry when you can help it, or getting them to be upset, because those predictable behaviors aren't ones that absorb information. They aren't ones that take you seriously. You get seen as a threat, and that's something to avoid. So we're going to try and not do that. We're going to try and keep people happy-ish. We're going to try and keep them on a fairly emotional, positive emotional state. All right. So we have these emotional state machines, and we're going to talk to them. And the most important thing to remember when we're doing this is that they are not you, right? Other people are not yourself, which seems obvious, that other people have a different background, a different experience, completely different internal world. But humans are really bad, really atrociously bad at acting on that information. We don't even recognize it until we're 4. By 4 years old, humans tend to recognize that other humans are individuals. And I, in my mid-30s, still sometimes have that problem, where I think that my husband has been with me all day when he has definitely not. And I'm like, you remember that? And he's like, no, I don't, because I'm an individual who has their own life, mostly. Okay, so this is worth knowing, because this is going to be a tool, right? Because everybody's bad at this. If you're not, you have a huge advantage. No one's expecting you to be good at it. So if you don't take their actions at face value and you observe their behavior and you get that idea of, okay, this is where you're coming from, this is what your actual motivation is, you can kind of act as sort of with them, and they tend to think of you as being on their side, and there's a bit of trust and familiarity that you can get almost for free, which is great, because that's what you want. You want people to trust your fix, to trust your solution, to trust your information, and not just dismiss you. And one way to do this is just to figure out, okay, you're doing this action, which is telling me that all these things are false positive. There's probably a reason for that. It's probably not they're false positive, because they're not. I know they're not. It's probably you have a deadline. You don't know how to fix it. You don't want to admit that you're deficient, that you don't know how to do this. And so this is a way to get around that, and you can go, okay, it's not that they think this is false positive, it's that there's some other pressure causing that behavior. And that can be handy, and we'll use that. And we're going to talk in terms of other people's interests. Thank you, Dale. When you do that, again, you get that huge advantage. You get that trust, you get that familiarity right away. The other book we're going to use, but very loosely, it turns out, is Chris Hagnagy's book. We're going to use a little bit of his framework on social engineering. We're going to jump through an engagement somewhat similar to what I do for work, talking through people, talking through with a developer, their security finding, and we're going to use this as a rough guide. I've made some, it's not going to exactly map up, but this is handy if you haven't read it yet, probably have since you're here, but it's useful, it's got some great information in it, and it's a good place to start. All right, so we found a bug. That's what we're going to start with. We found SQL injection, and we're going to talk to the developers at WebGoats R Us. This is pretty straightforward SQL injection. It's in this drop-down menu. It turns out they're really, really nice, and they're printing out the SQL statement for us so we can see exactly what we're doing. It's expecting an integer, but we can give it a string. Great, and we can dump their table and do other things, but in this particular case, we've dumped the table. So handy, thank you. So we're going to talk to some people about it. So our recon. So this is our information gathering step. We're going to get some information about things in two phases. So the first thing is we needed to know something, and we're going to start with who we're planning on talking to. So who's our developer? Get some light recon on this person. But we're not going to be creepy about it. This is creepy, by the way. I was trying to find Superman being good, like using his X-ray vision to like be a nice guy, and then this is, what are you doing, Superman? How many people's chests have you looked at today in order to find this one guy? All right, so we're not going to do that. We're not going to find passwords. We're not going to find mother's maiden name. We're not going to find street address. We don't need that, right? It's not required. The kind of things we do need for Ford Prefect is we need to know that he's a hoopy fruit, and that he's a software developer at WebGoats R Us. So job title's handy. You're not always going to get the developer. You might get someone who's not familiar with the code. That can be harder when you're focusing on fixing. It can be easier in other ways. If you're just demonstrating something, someone who isn't the developer is more likely to just take your demonstration at face value because they've got less invested in the code itself. But we're going to talk to the software developer. So a little thing, we found a little bit about him through public internet searches, right? Like he's not on Twitter, but we know that he hosts a local Java meetup, which gives us a clue about what the application is written in, which is handy because we're going to need to know that later. All right. So this is the name thing, using someone's name when you're talking to them. This doesn't always work because everybody knows about it, right? So when you're obvious about it, it kind of seems like you're trying to get something. But it mostly works. It works really well if someone gives you their name, they introduce themselves, and then you say their name back to them, either right away or a little bit later. Again, it is another way of bringing yourself into their circle, of getting that trust, getting that familiarity without a lot of work. It's handy. When people use the name thing on me, I'm very suspicious. So it's a 50-50. All right, so there's a technical part of this. We know that we have a SQL injection bug. We get that for free. We already figured that part out. But how are you going to fix it? You're talking to a developer. They don't just want to know how you exploit it. They have to fix this thing. You're going to want to know what language it's running on and maybe a little bit about it. So what do we know? What can we learn from this information? Well, we already know that he hosts a Java meetup, so it's probably written in Java. We can confirm that with the server banner. This is from Tomcat. So we know, okay, cool, it's Java, it's probably got JSPs. Excellent. We know that it expects an integer and it's not validating it because there's no error message, it's just passing it right through. We know that there's only 6 possible values, and it's not checking against those either. And we also know it's not using a prepared statement, which is usually the standard recommendation for SQL injection. You're usually just going to say, use a prepared statement. All of this will go away. But you at least now you have 3 different tactics. 3 different things. It's Java, so you know that there are prepared statements and they're not hard to do. You know that it's a strongly typed language, so you can easily do an int validation. And you know that a whitelist is probably possible if somebody wanted to do that. So you have some avenues to explore. Okay, so this is my favorite part when watching people do social engineering engagements, is their pretext, is why they're doing this, set up their lies that they tell to get away with things. We're going to do something that's only kind of pretext. So most devs want to write good code. And even if they don't, they probably aren't going to admit that they don't want to write good code. So it's a safe thing to assume, because they're probably just going to go along with it. And good code means you fix bugs. So if we can frame this as a bug, if we can go, hey, we want to help you make good code, instead of, hey, we really care about our security finding, we care about you writing good code, we can probably make some headway. And most security issues, when we're talking about code, can really come down to, hey, this is a bug. Just like other functional bugs. We know the code fails to validate its input, right? And it's a situation where validating it isn't hard, and it will make sure it's always following the happy path. Probably should be validating it. We also know that it's concatenating it directly into the SQL string and running that raw SQL query, which is another not great thing to do, right? So that's not great. That's not best practices. So we can frame this in that way, and we can use it to get further. This is the hard part. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. This is going to be about the code. Right. Shucks. This is going to be about the code. This is going to be about their manager who's on their back about it. This is going to be about them who are driving you crazy, trying to tell you that everything is fine. So this is hard, but it's really important. If you can focus on the positive, you can get much further. Again, for some of the same reasons we saw before. Right, so we're going to do the phone call. We're going to talk to Ford, and we're going to explain the findings, and we're going to talk to him about why he does not think they are valid. Right, and how do you stay positive when talking about a vulnerability or a bug? But you're going to focus on helping, which is maybe not what you were hoping to do, but it works. You're going to focus on fixing and not on exploiting, and this is super counterintuitive because the whole reason you're talking to them is because you can exploit it. Yeah, but they don't care, and they shouldn't have to, because they can probably think about it in other terms. This idea of having developers think like an attacker isn't always going to work, so maybe sometimes go the other way and think like a maker. We do get to being able to explain the exploit. Eventually, it is important to know how it works and be able to demonstrate it, but we're not going to make it the star. So Ford says his finding is FP. He says he's validating the data. That's his drop-down menu, by the way. His drop-down menu is his validation. And your security finding must be wrong. And if you think this never happens, I had something very similar to this, almost identical, 3 weeks ago. Okay, so how do we start with something other than no? How do we start with something other than, oh my goodness, what are you doing? Stop it. Which is hard, right? That's what you want to do. When you started this job, I was like, I just want to tell them to stop it, right? Like, that's not validation. But that's not a great place to start. What we want to do is be able to avoid negative reinforcement, right? We want to be able to avoid just saying, stop it. Negative reinforcement, this is a thing that people study. So it's worth knowing it exists. So it's when undesirable behavior is punished, right? Makes sense. It tends to lead to avoidance of the punishment and avoidance of the behavior. It does not necessarily lead to the desirable behavior, which in this case would be fixed code, right? It will mean they'll pass the test some other way. They'll remove it from the staging server so you can't get to this page, but it'll still be in production, but you're not testing production, you're testing staging. Or if it's a static scan, they'll remove the code, or real life example, this one was exciting. So there's cross-site scripting findings. There was a whole lot of them, static findings. They didn't know how to fix them. They'd tried fixing them and had broken the application. They found out that using the supported cleanser, they could just move their code into that class, into that package, and we wouldn't find it anymore. So it fixed it, sort of, still valid, still out there, still exploitable, but we weren't finding it for the static scanner. It was at least as much work as actually fixing it. There were no more findings, but eventually there were, because we fixed our engine, we changed how we were looking at these packages, at these approved cleansing packages, and we found all the findings again. This team came to me and told me that all the findings were false positive, and that we were flagging findings in the cleansing library, and that why would we ever do that? And then it was actually their code, and they had to go through, remove it from that package, rewrite it, and fix it again, probably tripling their work. And it was because no one took the effort to go through how you would fix this. How would you actually make this not suck? And it was just punishment, right? It was just, this has to be fixed. You can't do this. So Pretext, the one we set up earlier, that provides a guide for positive reinforcement. The goal is good code, right? We're going to fix the security bug, and we're going to roll that into that positive reinforcement. So we're going to go towards that goal of things working and being great. Right. So Ford, we're going to go and take a look at his drop-down menu. He's going to show me his validation. It's going to be great. And while he's there, we're going to open up Chrome DevTools. We're going to be, hey, how about you just right-click or Control-I? Let's take a look. Hey, can you double-click on the value in that tag and change it to whatever you want? And then press send, and oh, look, it sends. So we can give him that ability to figure it out himself, right? We can show him the ability to walk through. And again, this is actually what happened 3 weeks ago. He was very proud of his validation of his drop-down menu. We went through and we changed it. We didn't exploit it on the phone. That wasn't the point. It was just, this isn't enough, right? Sometimes it's fun to go through and teach them to exploit it. Sometimes this isn't the right time. This is a time to be able to show that this thing doesn't work, but we can do more. Let's empower you to be able to figure that out. And then once we frame that issue, and we say, okay, that's not enough validation. You wanted to validate. Great. We can do that. We're going to do it on the server side, right? We're going to do it where it does something. And all of a sudden, this isn't just something us weirdos care about, right? This isn't just, hey, you people think differently than me. You do things that I don't do. This is validation, and this is validation in the right place and making sure your code works. All right. So another thing that works in social engineering is priming. It doesn't work like this. So this is the subliminal images that they used to show to get you to go buy popcorn during the movie. That doesn't work. The way that priming does work is that things that you've seen before, things that you've encountered before are familiar. They're usually in a good way, although not always. But you have prior reactions and prior feelings about different things, and you rely on them, and you use them again, even if you only see those things quickly, even if it's only sort of tangential. And because of that, we're fighting against it, right? So for Ford, interactions with security have never been good. It has always been bad. Security comes up, we're not happy about it. He's never been able to see how it really relates to his job. It's never been able to come home and be something that he does and is responsible for, except for when people are yelling at him to fix it and make it go away. But there are available resources, and that's why we chose that pretext of caring about quality code. Because there are pressures to care about what you do and to care about making sure that things are good. If he runs a meetup, probably does care about those things. And we can use those prior experiences with good coding practices and good engineering practices to be able to piggyback on them and get things fixed. So this is leading questions. So Dale says start with questions to which the other person will always answer yes. This is, again, these are all about trust and familiarity. That's sort of the secret for Dale Carnegie. When you start to say yes, there's pressure to continue to agree. There's pressure to continue. You've already said yes to one thing. Everything else, your mind sort of shortcuts. It's part of the same package. So yes becomes sort of what you do. It makes sense that the next question would be related to the first one in a way that it would also be, I agree with you. Or it makes the next question easier to answer. It makes it more familiar. This is a dirty, rotten trick that your brain plays on you, but it does work. Leading questions can get you to getting a yes, and you'll see salespeople do it all the time. So there are two types of questions. There's closed and open. Closed is yes, no. Open is when you're going to tell me a story, because I'm going to ask you a question about your code. What does this do? Where does this come from? And we can go on a journey. And we're going to let you do all the talking, Ford. So when you lead those questions, you get them to go, okay, we're going to talk to your code. We're going to go through that validation. We're going to see what's going on. And then we get them to explain it. In fact, we're going to get them to solve it, right? They're going to come up with their own validation. Because they know how to do that. They know how to make good code. They just aren't doing it right here because they didn't know they had to. Just fine. Because we're here to be superheroes. All right. So we've shown him how to bypass his validation. We can talk to him about what does work. And at this point, we can talk about the exploit. Finally, we can finally talk about why we're here. And we're going to talk about validation. So when we're talking about the exploit, we're going to talk about what we're doing with SQL injection. Why in this particular case it's an integer, so we don't even need quotes. So if he says, oh, I've got a cleansing function, and I make sure there's no quotes, it doesn't matter, because I don't need them. So it's important at this point, you get to say, okay, what is the injection? Why does it matter? What is it you actually have to validate? You can do validation that does nothing, right? You can validate all possible characters. That's not useful. In this particular case, an integer is not going to cause SQL injection. So you could just validate your expected valid input is an integer. Check to make sure it's an integer. But this is when you talk about the specifics, because this is where, for the fix, in this case we're going to go with validation. It matters. It matters what actually is happening and what the exploit actually is. All right. So SQL injection is not always so straightforward. It's not always just an integer that comes in directly, and you can go for it. When the code path is more complicated, that's when the questions become really useful, and when getting them to tell you the story about what's going on is the A1 strategy. I have a coworker whose ability to bring someone through their code to figure out where the problem is majestic. The Runkle. He knows everything, right? Like, he knows what the code path is, he knows what the exploit is, he knows what they would have to do to fix it. But he doesn't tell them the answer right away, because that's not useful. Just saying, hey, do this, doesn't give them understanding, it doesn't give them the power to own it, to feel like they're the ones that are taking this action and are responsible for it. And that's what you want, right? You want them to be able to do this again, to have that positive experience and to own this from beginning to end. So what he does is he knows what's going to go on, he understands everything, and he goes, okay, where does this come from? All right, can you tell me if this is this or this? Okay, so it's an integer. You think you're validating it. Great. When this comes through, is this a string? Yes. Okay, great. So we've got our leading question. We've already agreed to us. We have somebody who's going to listen probably to the next thing we have to say, hopefully. Okay, it comes in as a string from the request. Where does that string go? Does it go through a validator? Oh, it does. Okay, great. What does that validator do? And we can go through and we can see that it's just checking to see for single quotes. Right? It's expecting this to be regular SQL injections. Somebody had already tried to fix it and they checked for single quotes. All right, cool. So when we take a look at where this is added into the SQL string, are there any quotes around the variable? No. There are not any quotes around the variable because it's an integer, right? It's going into the SQL statement as an integer, even though it's a string. Okay. So that's probably, would that solve this issue if it's removing quotes and there aren't any quotes there? Is that going to be able to limit us from adding extra characters? And all of a sudden they get it, right? Just through questioning, through them being able to walk through that process, it is so much more effective than being able to just tell them. When you just tell them, they're not thinking about it in the same way. It's not the same kind of personal experience. And so being able to go through and have that question and answer and those leading questions is really important. All right. I need to remember that I talk fast when I'm nervous, so I'm almost at the end. But all right, so ending the call, when we go through this and we go through the questions and we let them really own it and we talk about it in terms of code quality, it's really easy. They end it for you because they're happy and they tell you thank you. It doesn't happen every time. There are times when obviously it's more of a fight, but when this goes well, which is most of the time, they understand. They know their next actions. They have a path forward. It's phrased in ways that they already understand. They don't have to come up with a new full understanding of the world, and they're good to go. They're going to go and they'll fix their code and maybe even do better next time. Yeah, and I really did rip through those. So I await your questions. Thank you. Brett? Yeah, go for it.
So have you ever had the experience where you've tried this technique and gone through it over a period of time and you're not getting through and you got so frustrated you went through the negative reinforcement?
Yeah.
And how did that turn out for you? Because I've done this and it did not turn out well.
I keep a box of tissues by my desk.
Okay.
So there are times when I will go through it multiple times. Right? If it doesn't work the first time, I'm going to go again. Eventually, it's just like, no, this doesn't work. This doesn't work for this reason, this reason, this reason. We have an advantage at Veracode. This is not. We're just doing very short engagements, and I'm not their security person. So eventually I can just be like, look, this is someone else's problem. But eventually, after trying several times. But yeah, it can get really difficult because sometimes it is just, look, this is the way it works. I understand you don't want it to work this way. But it does. And it doesn't always work. I suspect that they're not going to fix their code then. Yeah. Hi, Ring.
Yo, can you go back to a few slides? Can you go back to a few slides? I think I read something about developers being coders, whatever you want to call them.
Your mic's still not on.
No. Yeah, no. Right, go. Yeah, what do you mean by negative incentives? I mean, in this real life example,
yeah, so negative
what
incentives,
are they?
So only no positive ones, right? So there's like, if you do things good, there's no celebration, there's no congratulations, there's no even checking to make sure you did it the right way. It's just, if you do it wrong, there's punishment. That's it. We don't work well that way as humans, right? You don't like being told over and over again that you're awful. I don't.
Oh, I thought they got written up,
Yeah. I mean, there are people who I talk to who definitely have issues, like their job, they're concerned with their job because of the security of their application. Yeah, absolutely. Like they can't release and then that becomes a problem. It's not security that's going to put their job in danger, but the fact that they can't release is definitely going to cause problems with their own management. Yeah. Anybody else? I'm sorry I went so fast. Yeah.
This is a great.
I don't think it's working.
Low on battery, something. Oh, there we go. This is a great catalog of how you respond to the defense mechanism of the developer.
Yeah.
What are the most common ways that you see this sort of behavior on the developer side manifest? Is there a top 5 ways that developers tell you that it's not their problem?
Yeah, so sometimes literally with those words. There was one time we were talking about flaws, like, hey, let's take a look at your code. Let's take a look at what your code is actually doing. Let's look at how it's functioning. And his response to me was, this is about a security issue, not the functionality of the code. I was like, actually, I think it might be about your code. Let's take a look. And then we were able to go through and we were able to use technique. That one did not end in tears. That was okay. Yeah. But it started off a little shaky. So there's other ones, especially if you're looking at file issues, file access issues, inclusion or path traversal, especially with Windows systems. They'll say, this is taken care of. Right? We've got strong user controls. We're good. Without, it's like, well, your application, do you use the same user? Like, are you using the AD permissions of the person who's logged in? No. Well, then how is that taken care of? Your application has different abilities than an individual. So if your application has a problem, yes, it's good to have these user controls. Your AD permissions are good, but it's not solving this problem. Yeah. And that acknowledging that the controls are good for certain things is the way that you get around that just saying no first. You're like, yeah, good job, that's great, but otherwise it sucks. Yeah, so. I know, I'm on questions, but you can ask me a question if you just showed up. It'd be cool. I was really fast, I'm sorry. Yeah. I don't know. If not, then thanks everybody. I'll be around for like a while if anyone has any other questions. So thank you.